Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with a treasury of common sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Morning, Leith. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Phil. How about yourself?
Good. I've just been reading about the Smoot-Hawley Act, which Herbert Hoover introduced in 1930 to shield American industries from foreign competition, widely regarded as a political misstep. Are you familiar with this one?
I am. Well, it's very interesting time. So the average US tariff rate now is at a level we haven't seen for more than 100 years.
Mm.
So we're sort of going back to the future, which is quite extraordinary.
And do you think that no lessons were learnt by this, or nobody decided to go back 100 years and see what happened in history?
Yeah, look, it's always very hard to know what President Trump is thinking, but certainly I think the good president is going to have a bit of a comeuppance because he's managed to aggravate not just the rich Americans who obviously hold the assets, etc., who've seen their asset portfolio smashed, the business owners and that sort of thing, but soon he's going to get the wrath, I think, of the ordinary American because, President Trump has just slapped another 50% tariff on China, and that takes their tariff rate up to about 100%, or just over 100%. And
over 104, I think, at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, 104. So what this basically means is that the poor old working class American who's obviously suffering cost of living pressures like we are in Australia, when they rock up to Walmart to buy their, flat screen TV or, new laptop for their kids or some clothes or whatever, the majority of US consumer goods come out of China, obviously. So when they rock up to Walmart or on Amazon or whatever to try and buy a Chinese good, it's going to cost a hell of a lot more money now. And I think they're going to be asking themselves what the hell's happened.
Yeah, and it's not just the common man, it's also the tech billionaires. They're not happy either. All right, let's talk about the never-ending housing crisis here in Australia. Where are we at with this? Yeah,
this is a problem that I just can't see a solution the way the government's treated at the moment. So the Grattan Institute, which is a think tank, released some research this week complaining that Australia hasn't built enough homes and that this lack of supply of homes has driven up prices and rents. And Grattan estimated that the national median dwelling price has risen from about 4 times median household incomes at the turn of the century, so around 2000, 2001, to more than 8 times in 2024. So basically, the cost of housing as a proportion of income has doubled this century, the last 24 odd years. And Grattan claims the solution is just to build more housing. We've got to build more high density apartments in Australia, suburbs, blah blah blah. Now, I'll say from the outset that Grattan loves to complain about the housing market, the housing shortages, rents, and all that sort of stuff. It's always hand-wringing about that. But at the same time, they're also a think tank that continually pushes for more immigration. So they're also a huge supporter of Big Australia immigration, which to me is completely contradictory. You can't complain about the housing market and the lack of supply at the same time as you constantly promote and lobby the government to increase immigration. It's completely contradictory. And as usual, the Grattan Institute in its research, in calling for more supply, ignored the fact that Australia has experienced the developed world's fastest population increase this century. So according to World Bank data, which you can compare population growth across countries, between 2000 and 2023, because they haven't updated 2024 yet, Australia's population grew by 40%. Now that was more than double the OECD average of 16%. And it was also higher than peer countries like Canada, which grew by 31%, New Zealand 35%, United Kingdom 16%, United States 19%, and the Euro area's population only increased by 8%. So obviously, Australia's added an extra 8.5 million people this century alone, so since 2000. And these 8.5 million people obviously need to live somewhere. It's the demand side, not the supply side, that's the problem. We're importing far too many people. We're importing... we're growing the population a lot faster than the nation can possibly hope to build housing and infrastructure and energy and all this other stuff. And the hilarious thing about this, Phil, is that the Grattan Institute itself, just last year, put out some research and said that the share of migrants that work in construction is substantially lower than Australian-born workers. So they calculate that for migrants that have arrived in Australia 5 years or less ago, only 2.8% of migrants work in construction, but they account for 4.4% of all workers in Australia. So recent migrants account for 4.4% of all jobs, but only 2.8% of them. They only account for 2.8% of the construction workforce. Mm-hmm. So they're completely underrepresented in the construction workforce. And as a result, what this tells you is that Australia's migration system is directly worsening the housing crisis because it's pumping demand, it's importing hundreds of thousands of people every year, and it's not contributing to supply because the migrants that we're importing aren't working in construction. And the reason why it's a problem, Phil, is the 2024 population statement from the Treasury, which came out in December. This is from the Centre for Population. It's their official projections. It projected that Australia's population is going to grow by 13.5 million people in just 40 years. Now, that's obviously a big number, but just to put that into perspective so people listening understand just how big a number that is, 13.5 million people is the same as adding another Sydney, another Melbourne, and another Brisbane to Australia's population in just 40 years.
Wow.
We're somehow supposed to add a Sydney, a Melbourne, and a Brisbane in just 40 years. Mm-hmm. Now, driven solely by permanently high net overseas migration of 235,000 annually. That's what's projected every year for the next 40 years by the Centre for Population. Now, obviously, if we're going to add another Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, we need to add all the housing. So, if people just visualise Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, think about all the houses in those cities, all the infrastructure in those cities, all the water supplies that's needed, all the energy that's required, we're going to have to basically replicate that again in 40 years to maintain current living standards, let alone improve living standards.
Right, without the right skilled workers.
That's right. It's just impossible. It's an impossible task. As I said, it's taken Sydney 230 years, whatever it is, to get to its current size. But then we're supposed to add that again in 40 years and a Melbourne and a Brisbane. Mm. It's not possible.
Do you know what it reminds me of when you say this, that all they need to do is build more houses? It reminds me of when people say, well, there's no money, so why don't we just print some more money and everything will be fine?
Yeah, it's completely nonsensical. The fact of the matter is we've been running this high immigration experiment for 20 years. So 20 years ago in 2005, the then government, the Howard government decided, hey, you know what, we need to more than double immigration. So for the 60 years post-World War II, Australia's net overseas migration averaged 90,000 a year. And in that 60-year period, we only exceeded 150,000 net overseas migration twice. And we only, in 2 years. And we only exceeded it by a little bit. And since then, in the 15 years following 2005, up to the pandemic, we averaged 220,000 net overseas migration. So we went up from 90,000 average for 60 years to 220,000. Since then, obviously, we've experienced more record immigration, and under these projections from the Centre for Population, we're going to average 235,000 net overseas migration for 40 years. So this here is the problem. We haven't built enough houses, infrastructure, everything in the last 20 years. So what makes anybody think that we can possibly do it for another 40 years when we grow by another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane in just 40 years? Again, we need all the houses that are in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, all the infrastructure, all the water, all the energy, infrastructure, everything. We need to replicate that again in 40 years, and it's taken us 200-odd years to get to the point we're at now. We need to replicate all that again in just 40 years. It's just not possible, and this is the thing that drives me nuts. So the Australian Greens today announced that they want to, if they join forces with Labor and form a government, they're going to try and pressure Labor to implement a rental freeze. So basically, to stop landlords raising rents, because they reckon that'll solve the housing crisis. But like the Grattan Institute, anytime anybody mentions lowering immigration, the Greens call you a racist. And they try and shut down debate. And the Greens' policy is open borders immigration. They want more immigration, but then they cry about the housing crisis.
Yeah, right.
And it's just completely contradictory here. And the fact of the matter is the number one solution to solve the housing crisis is to lower immigration, because lower immigration helps renters directly because it lowers rental inflation. It also helps first home buyers because it makes it easier for first home buyers to save a deposit because they're spending less on rents, and it also lowers house prices, which then makes it easier for first home buyers to then be able to buy a house. And the fact of the matter is, Australia's housing situation is never going to improve so long as the federal government continues to import hundreds of thousands of people every year into the housing market, adding to demand and driving these perpetual housing shortages, which is what we're going to get forever if we keep doing this. Again, I'll say it one more time. The official projection from the federal government is to grow the nation's population by 13.5 million people in just 40 years, which is the equivalent of adding another Sydney, another Melbourne, and another Brisbane to Australia's current population in just 40 years. The math just does not add up. The federal government and most of the media, they just say, we just need to build more homes. That'll solve it. But we've never done that. And the fact of the matter is we don't have the workforce for it. We don't have the resources for it. And we can never keep up with such manic population growth. We can't build another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane in 40 years.
That's it, mate. This is why you're the mayor of the Treasury of Common Sense. And if people want to find some common sense, where do they go, buddy?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So they can go to macrobusiness.com.au. I write about these sorts of issues every single day.